It was supposed to be just another quiet morning inside Louisiana Correctional Facility for women. The fluorescent lights flickered slightly as Officer Brianna Lee made her usual rounds down cell block C. The hallway smelled like cheap disinfectant and stale sweat, nothing out of the ordinary. But at exactly 6:14 a.m., the quiet broke. A blood-curdling scream echoed from the far end of the corridor. "Inmate down. Someone call medical now," another officer shouted, his voice shaky with panic. Brianna sprinted toward the sound, her boots slamming the linoleum floor. When she reached the communal restroom, she stopped cold. There, slumped awkwardly against the back wall next to the second stall, lay the body of Gloria Mayfield, 63 years old, one of the prison's oldest inmates. Her face was pale, lips slightly parted, and her eyes stared blankly at the ceiling as if still clinging to some last thought. Her prison-issued sweatshirt was soaked in blood around her swollen abdomen. She was 8 months pregnant. The room went silent. Even the buzzing light above seemed to hold its breath. A pool of blood had formed beneath her, mixing with the cracked, dirty tiles. One of her hands still clutched a piece of paper, soaked red, the ink smeared but not entirely illegible. Brianna bent down and gently pried the paper from her cold fingers. It read, "Forgive him, but don't forget me." Beneath it, a scribbled ID number, number 3279. It didn't register right away, but when it did, Brianna felt her stomach turn. Number 3279 belonged to Darius Coleman, a 29-year-old rookie correctional officer who had joined the facility just under a year ago. Get medical, get Warden James, and shut down this wing. Now, Brianna ordered, her voice suddenly sharp, eyes fixed on Gloria's lifeless body. Minutes later, emergency staff arrived. One paramedic dropped his bag when he saw the belly. She was pregnant?" he asked, stunned. They immediately checked for a fetal heartbeat. A tense 15 seconds passed. Then a flicker of sound, a faint, steady rhythm. "She's gone," the paramedic confirmed grimly, "but the baby's still alive. We need to move now." As the team rushed out with the emergency cradle and Gloria's body was carefully bagged, the questions started flying. How did a 63-year-old woman, serving life without parole, end up pregnant inside a maximum security prison? Why wasn't this detected sooner? Who was responsible? And why was she found dead, alone, just days before she was scheduled to be transferred to a medical facility for delivery? But for Officer Brianna Lee, the question that haunted her most wasn't about logistics or timelines. It was the paper, the handwriting, the tone, the way "Don't Forget Me" was underlined twice. Because for some strange reason, that handwriting looked familiar. Before she became inmate number 5572, Gloria Mayfield had once worn a white uniform and held trembling hands of strangers as they clung to life. Back in the early 1990s, she was known as Nurse Mayfield, a calm, nurturing presence at St. John's Memorial Hospital in Baton Rouge. Patients trusted her. Families cried in her arms. Doctors often said she had healing hands, but it wasn't just her medical skills. Gloria had a way of making people feel like they mattered, even in their final moments. She worked night shifts mostly, quieter, more honest, she used to say. In the quiet hum of machines and distant coughs, she'd walk the halls, offering soft words and warm blankets. She was the kind of nurse who never needed to write your name on a chart to remember it. But while she offered comfort to strangers, her own home was a place of silence and bruises. Her husband, Leon Mayfield, had been a mechanic, strong, proud, and short-tempered. He drank too much, shouted too loud, and struck too hard. For nearly 30 years, Gloria endured his rages behind closed doors. Broken ribs, black eyes, lies to the ER staff about slipping in the kitchen. She never pressed charges. Not once. He's not a bad man, she would whisper to co-workers when they saw the signs. Just broken. But something broke inside Gloria too, eventually. The final straw came one summer night in 2008. Leon came home drunk, found out Gloria had used part of their savings to pay for her sister's funeral arrangements. He flew into a rage. That night, he beat her so badly she couldn't see out of her left eye for a week. He left her lying on the bathroom floor, unconscious and bleeding. The next morning, when he passed out on the couch, Gloria stood in the kitchen for nearly 2 hours, motionless, staring at the knife block. Then she picked up the heaviest one and did what the courts later called premeditated murder. She called 911 herself. I just killed my husband, she told the dispatcher, voice flat. Please come quickly. I don't want the neighbors to see. During her trial, the jury wasn't allowed to hear about the decades of abuse. Her public defender had too many cases and too little time. Gloria never cried during the proceedings. She sat still, hands folded, listening to strangers dissect her life like a crime scene. The judge gave her life without parole. She was 46. The day she entered Louisiana Correctional Facility, she was met with stares, some curious, some judgmental. Most women in the prison system had faced abuse, but few looked as quiet about it as Gloria. She never started fights. She never raised her voice. She spent most of her time in a library or the chapel. Within a year, inmates began calling her Mama G. At first, she resisted the nickname. I'm nobody's mother, she'd say, but deep down, it filled a hole she never dared speak of. The truth was, Gloria had been pregnant once, long before Leon. She was only 17, and her strict Baptist parents forced her to give the baby up. Shame before the Lord, her mother hissed. Gloria never saw the child again. She didn't even know if it was a boy or a girl. That grief, like a coiled spring, stayed buried for decades. And then came prison. Ironically, behind those iron bars, Gloria found something like peace. She ran Bible study classes. She taught younger inmates how to read. On Sundays, she'd braid hair for the girls who didn't have mothers to visit. She never asked for special treatment, never complained. Except in the late hours, when everyone was asleep, Gloria would sit by the barred window of her cell, scribbling in a small composition notebook. She wrote to someone named only as B. Dear B, today was hard. A girl on C block miscarried. She screamed so loud, I thought my ribs would crack. But I sat with her. I held her hand. I keep thinking about you. Do you know I've never forgotten you? Not even once. Love always. G. No one ever saw her mail those letters. Some believed B was imaginary, a coping mechanism. Others thought it was code for Bible. But Gloria knew B was real. The truth was far more complicated than anyone imagined. By 2023, Gloria's hair had turned silver, but her spirit stayed steady. Then, in late September, something changed. She grew quieter, ate less, avoided chapel. When a fellow inmate joked that Gloria was getting a belly, she just smiled politely and changed the subject. By the time the prison doctor discovered the pregnancy in early December, Gloria was already more than 24 weeks along. Everyone was stunned. Whispers spread. Some inmates laughed. Others were disgusted. But the older ones? They looked at her with something like awe. She's going to be a mama, one whispered. At 63, Gloria refused to say who the father was. She simply said, "This baby is mine." That's all that matters. The warden ordered a full internal investigation. Tests were run, interviews conducted, but Gloria wouldn't speak. She requested to be transferred to a medical facility for her delivery. The request was approved. Her transfer date? March 17th. She died on March 15th. The truth however, had not died with her. And someone in that prison knew exactly how she got pregnant and why she had to be silenced before her baby could speak for her. When Darius Coleman first walked into Louisiana Correctional Facility, he looked more like a high school football coach than a corrections officer. At just 29 years old, tall, lean, and with an easy smile, he had the kind of charm that made people lower their guard. He was a recent graduate of a small criminal justice program, the kind of guy who checked off all the right boxes on paper. Clean record, no priors, references from 2 former professors, a letter of recommendation from his church pastor. But what the warden didn't see, what the background check didn't catch, was Darius's deep craving for control. Not order, not discipline, control. He had been working night shifts for less than 4 months when Gloria Mayfield came on his radar. To most of the inmates, Gloria was invisible. An old woman, past her prime, too quiet to be interesting. But Darius? He noticed her calm, her steady routine, her eyes that never begged for anything. Unlike the others, Gloria didn't flirt, didn't complain, didn't threaten lawsuits or play games. And maybe that's what made her different. She was the only one who didn't fear him. It started small. A bottle of extra-strength Tylenol slipped under her door after she limped back from the laundry room. A peanut butter sandwich during a late-night round, when he knew she hadn't eaten dinner. Then a conversation. "You don't talk much," he said one night, stopping outside her cell. "I talk enough," she replied, without looking up from her knitting. "You always this tough?" Gloria finally raised her eyes, studying him. "You always this nosy?" That made him laugh. And so it began. Over the following weeks, Darius lingered longer outside her cell during rounds. They spoke about the prison library, about her Bible studies, about the state of the world. Gloria, at first cautious, began to soften. She appreciated the conversations, the company. It had been years since anyone had spoken to her like she was something other than an inmate. Then came the blackout. A faulty transformer took out power to C block for nearly an hour. No lights, no cameras, no backup. Darius, alone on shift, made his way through the darkened halls with only a flashlight. And he stopped, too long, outside Gloria's cell. When the power returned, inmates whispered. Gloria didn't, but something had changed. In the days that followed, she stopped attending chapel. Her notebook remained unopened. She withdrew. She began vomiting in the mornings. When a medical unit confirmed her pregnancy, Gloria stared at the wall and said nothing. "Who's the father?" the nurse asked. No response. "Gloria, did someone force themselves on you?" Still silence. Eventually, she whispered, "It won't matter what I say. No one will believe me." Darius panicked when he heard the news. He thought he'd been careful. No one saw them. No one had access to the cameras during the blackout. But he hadn't accounted for nature. He confronted her one night when she was leaving the infirmary. "You need to fix this," he hissed, gripping her arm tightly in the shadows between the laundry wing and the chapel. Gloria didn't flinch. "I'm not hiding this. You think they'll believe you? An old convict? They'll say you seduced me. Or made it up." She looked him dead in the eye. "I don't care what they say. I care about this child." His jaw clenched. "If you tell anyone it's mine, you'll regret it." Gloria smiled faintly, almost sadly. "I already regret you." What Darius hadn't realized was that Gloria had begun keeping records. She wrote everything down. The blackout, the day her symptoms started, what he said to her. She tucked those notes inside her mattress, beneath the stitching, just in case. She also started writing more letters to B, even though she hadn't mailed one in years. "B, I think you would have liked him at first. He was kind, or pretended to be. I don't know what scares me more, that I believed him or that I needed to." Whispers grew louder inside the prison. Inmates talked. Officers speculated. Someone even reported Darius anonymously, but with no hard evidence, and Gloria refusing to speak, the warden shut it down. But Gloria had other plans. She filed a formal request to be transferred to a state medical facility for delivery. It was approved. She was to leave in 3 days. That decision sealed her fate. The night before her transfer, Gloria did something she hadn't done in months. She went to chapel. Alone. She knelt by the altar, lit a candle, and whispered a prayer. Then, on the back of her old prison meal voucher, she wrote 6 words and 1 number. Forgive him, but don't forget me. Number 3279. She folded it, slipped it into her bra, and went to bed. The next morning, she walked to the restroom before breakfast. She never came out. When Brianna Lee later reviewed the hallway logs, she noticed something strange. Darius hadn't clocked out. His shift was supposed to end at 6 a.m., yet there was no record of him leaving the wing. Camera footage during the 5 to 6 o'clock hour corrupted, the IT team claimed. Gloria was found at 6:14 a.m. It was Officer Brianna who made the connection between the ID number on Gloria's bloodstained note and Darius's badge number. And it was Brianna who recognized the handwriting. The same looping script from a letter she'd received when she was 16 years old from a birth mother she never got to meet in person. A letter she'd kept all these years. Signed simply, G. By the time the calendar flipped to March, the tension inside cell block C had grown so thick it hummed in the walls. Word of Gloria's pregnancy had spread beyond whispers. Inmates speculated. Guards rolled their eyes. Administration scrambled to avoid a scandal. But Gloria Mayfield? She moved with quiet purpose. Her belly, now unmistakably round and full, made it impossible for her to hide. But she didn't try to anymore. She stopped dodging glances. She stood taller, slower but taller. Every morning, she shuffled to the infirmary alone, clutching her lower back. Her breathing was heavier. She no longer braided hair or ran Bible study. She was focused now, and the entire prison could feel it. She was preparing for something, or someone. Darius Coleman, on the other hand, was unraveling. He barely slept. Paranoid. Restless. His charm had evaporated. He snapped at inmates. Grew cold toward other guards. His eyes darted constantly toward cameras, to shadows, to locked doors that once made him feel in control. He knew the transfer date was coming. March 17th. 3 more days. 3 more nights. Once she was out, once that baby was born, there'd be no stopping the truth. The warden had already ordered a DNA test in secret, wanting to cover all bases. If it came back positive, Darius knew he'd be done. He wouldn't just lose his job. He'd go to prison himself. March 14th, a Thursday. The sky over Baton Rouge was heavy with gray clouds, like it knew something no one else did. That afternoon, Gloria walked to the chapel and lit a single candle. She prayed for the first time in weeks, not for forgiveness, but for protection. She was afraid, but not for herself. Lord, she whispered, if I have to be taken for this child to live, so be it. But please, let him live. That evening, she returned to her cell and carefully folded her notebook. She sewed it into the lining of the mattress, right beneath the top layer of foam. Then, she took out a small, crumpled photograph of a teenage girl. On the back, scribbled in blue ink, to be, if you ever find me, know I never stopped looking. That same night, Darius was waiting near the laundry corridor. He had timed it perfectly, knew her walking patterns, her needs. Pregnant women pee often. He knew she'd head to the restroom after lights out. He wasn't wearing his name tag. He didn't carry a flashlight, just gloves and fear. He caught her just as she was leaving the stall, hand already on her back from the usual cramps. Darius, she said plainly, it's too late to fix this. I'm not here to fix anything, he muttered, voice dry. I'm here to make sure you don't ruin my life. She looked at him, tired but unshaken. You already did that yourself. There was a pause, maybe 2 seconds, where he looked at her belly, then her face, then her hand reaching slowly toward her breast pocket. She was trying to reach the note. He lunged. In the struggle, she bit his hand. He slammed her into the wall. The stall door cracked open, hitting tile. She tried to scream, but his hand clamped over her mouth. He dragged her to the floor, used the same makeshift cloth he'd carried in his waistband, torn from hospital bed linen days earlier. He wrapped it around her neck. She fought. Her fingers scratched at his arms. Her body twisted, not just for herself, but for the child inside her. And then silence. He stood over her, breathing heavily, sweat dripping from his forehead. Her body lay still, but her hand still clutched that note. He took it, stuffed it in his own pocket. Then, out of fear, he put it back, almost as if part of him wanted to be caught. At 6:14 a.m., Officer Brianna Lee found Gloria's body in the stall. By 6:16 a.m., paramedics had confirmed the baby was alive. By 7 a.m., Warden James ordered lockdown and internal review. By 7:30 a.m., Darius Coleman had vanished from the staff roster. No time card punch, no locker checkout. But they knew it was him, because at 8:05 a.m., Brianna opened Gloria's clenched hand and saw the bloodstained note. "Forgive him, but don't forget me." And just beneath it, an ID number. Number 3279. That night, Brianna went back to her bunk and opened an old wooden box. Inside was a yellowed letter from 17 years ago, sent from a correctional facility. "To my daughter, I don't expect you to understand why I'm here, but I hope one day you'll understand who I was. I didn't run because I didn't love you. I stayed because I needed to survive. If you ever find this, know that I'm still your mother, with all the love I've never been allowed to give. Gloria." Brianna clutched the letter, tears falling freely now. She didn't need a DNA test. She already knew. The morgue at Our Lady of the Lake Medical Center was cold, sterile, and indifferent. It didn't care how long a body had lived, how much it had endured, or what secrets it took to the grave. At 9:13 a.m., Gloria Mayfield was officially pronounced dead. Her cause of death, ligature strangulation. Time of death, sometime between 5:15 and 5:45 a.m. Inside the hospital's neonatal intensive care unit. Just 2 floors up, her baby boy was fighting to breathe. Born at 36 weeks, slightly underweight but stable. His fists were clenched. His cries were weak but determined, as if he somehow understood what it cost his mother to bring him into the world. Officer Brianna Lee stood by the hallway window, watching the newborn through the glass. He was so small, so fragile, and yet he was the living, breathing proof of everything Gloria had tried to say and everything the system refused to hear. "I hope you never remember this place," she whispered. Behind her, the medical examiner approached quietly. "She had bruising on both wrists," he said. "Defensive wounds, torn fingernails." She fought back. Brianna nodded, jaw tight. She was 5'3", 132 pounds, 63 years old, and she fought him. The examiner paused. "That's not all." He handed her a plastic evidence bag. Inside was a tiny folded note, damp and wrinkled. She had this pressed against her skin, tucked into the inside seam of her bra. "We almost missed it." Brianna opened the note. "If I don't make it to tomorrow, tell him I still love him. Tell him I named him Daniel. Not after a man, but a story of survival." Brianna swallowed hard. Daniel, the child born in a place of chains and steel, given a name of resilience. Back at the prison, Warden James was losing control of the narrative. The press had caught wind. A 63-year-old inmate, 8 months pregnant, found murdered in the facility bathroom. The story was fire. Who's the father? How did this happen on your watch? Was it rape? Was it consensual? Was it covered up? They had no answers. Only redacted reports and malfunctioning camera logs. But one thing was clear. Someone had blood on their hands. Darius Coleman was nowhere to be found. His car had been left in the employee lot, keys still in the ignition. His locker had been emptied earlier in the week. Security footage from the exit gate between 6:30 and 7 a.m. had gone mysteriously missing. It didn't matter. Everyone knew. The guards, the inmates, the staff. Even if his name wasn't written in ink, it was burned into the walls now. Number 3279. In her cell, one of Gloria's closest friends, Marcia Tate, a 49-year-old inmate who shared meals with her most days, sat quietly with a small towel in her lap. Folded inside, it was the final letter Gloria had ever written in the prison. It wasn't addressed to Brianna. It wasn't addressed to Darius. It was addressed to God. You know I've made mistakes, but I don't believe this child is one of them. I carried pain for most of my life. Now for once, I carry love. If I must pay for this with my own breath, so be it, but I will not leave this world quietly. At the hospital, Brianna placed a note back into the evidence bag. Her badge felt heavier that day, not because of the weight of law, but because she now understood what it meant to fail someone without realizing it. She stared through the glass, watching baby Daniel twitch in his sleep. She thought of the letters, the notebook, the photo with the message. To be, if you ever find me. Her fingers gripped the strap of her holster. Then she loosened it. What Gloria needed now wasn't a gun. It was a voice. At that moment, in another wing of the hospital, a nurse noticed something strange. A man had entered the ER claiming abdominal pain, but refused to give ID. He had fresh scratches on his arms and bruising near his throat, from a fall, he claimed. But when the nurse passed by and saw a flyer for the breaking news, a female inmate found strangled in custody, she froze. The man in the ER bed looked just like the photo beside the headline. Darius Coleman. The ER nurse didn't hesitate. Within 10 minutes of recognizing Darius Coleman, she had alerted hospital security, who in turn called the Baton Rouge Police Department. By the time the officers arrived, Darius had attempted to sneak out through a rear exit. Limping, one hand still pressed to his abdomen, the other stuffed deep into his hoodie pocket. He didn't get far. At 9:41 p.m., just 16 hours after Gloria Mayfield's lifeless body was found in the prison restroom, the man who had haunted her final months was placed in handcuffs outside the emergency wing of the hospital. Name? The officer asked as he was shoved into the back of the cruiser. Darius stayed silent. He knew it didn't matter anymore. Back inside the facility, Officer Brianna Lee sat in the warden's office, her hands trembling slightly as she unfolded the notebook that had been found sewn into Gloria's mattress. Each page was a dagger. He came to me like a friend, said I reminded him of his grandmother. I should have known better. The blackout. That's when it happened. I told myself it was just confusion, that maybe I dreamed it, but I woke up sore and bleeding. I didn't report it. What's the point? No one listens to women like me. Not when we're old. Not when we're locked in cages. But when I felt the flutter, when I knew there was a life inside me, I realized something. This was mine. Not his. Not the system's. Mine. Brianna flipped to the final entry, dated 3 days before Gloria's death. They say I'll be transferred soon. I don't know if I'll make it. He watches me, follows me. I see it in his eyes. He's afraid I'll speak. But I won't whisper anymore. I'll write everything. So even if I die, the truth won't. To be. If you ever read this, I hope you know I tried. I never stopped trying. Tears burned at the corners of Brianna's eyes. She hadn't just failed as a corrections officer. She'd failed as a daughter. In the days that followed, a storm of evidence swept through the facility. DNA from under Gloria's fingernails matched Darius Coleman. Scratches across his forearms and bruises on his jaw were consistent with a physical struggle. The cloth used to strangle Gloria was traced back to a laundry inventory batch issued to C Block Medical Unit, where Darius had access during night shifts. Marcia Tate, the inmate who sat beside Gloria at meals, gave a full statement. She told me he scared her, that he warned her not to say anything. But she said, "He can't take my baby. Not this time." Another inmate, Yolanda Briggs, claimed to have heard strange scuffling from the restroom before morning count, but was too scared to check. A third, Officer Ray Daniels, admitted under pressure that he'd seen Darius exit C Block 12 minutes late, but didn't report it. Though the restroom cameras had been corrupted, a hidden maintenance hallway camera caught Darius entering C Block at 5:08 a.m. and not exiting until after 6 a.m. There was no official reason for him to be in that wing. He was off shift. He had signed out. And yet, he was there. The district attorney fast-tracked the case to a grand jury. The charges: first-degree murder, sexual assault of a vulnerable adult, abuse of authority, tampering with surveillance systems, obstruction of justice. At his arraignment, Darius finally spoke. She knew what she was doing, he said, eyes hollow. She wanted attention. She knew no one cared about her unless she had something in her belly. A gasp rippled through the courtroom. Brianna sat in the back, holding a tiny blue hat the nurses had knit for baby Daniel. She said nothing. She didn't need to. The silence itself was louder than any words Darius could offer. In the weeks following his arrest, the Louisiana Correctional Facility for Women came under intense investigation. The warden was suspended pending review. 2 corrections officers were fired for falsifying time cards and shift logs. The camera systems were replaced, and a civilian oversight board was brought in. Several former inmates stepped forward, sharing stories of harassment, assault, and threats that had gone unheard for years. Gloria Mayfield had broken the dam. As for Daniel, he spent his first weeks in the NICU, hooked to monitors and surrounded by machines. But every time Brianna visited, reading softly from books or humming old gospel hymns, his oxygen levels seemed to steady, his heart rate relaxed. On the day he was released, Brianna filled out the paperwork herself. Under guardian, she wrote, Brianna Lee Mayfield. And under mother's name, she didn't hesitate. Gloria Mayfield. The first night home with Daniel was nothing like Brianna had imagined. He cried every 2 hours, sharp, unfamiliar wails that pierced through her military-trained calm like sirens in a quiet town. She stood over his crib at 3:17 a.m., sleep-deprived, formula dribbling down her arm, and whispered to herself, "I can disarm an inmate with a paperclip, but I can't get this child to burp." She laughed through the tears. There were no lullabies in her childhood. No one to show her how to hold a bottle just right, how to rub a newborn's back in slow circles. She watched dozens of parenting videos in secret, afraid someone would judge her for not knowing. But slowly, one bottle, one diaper, one soft gospel song at a time, she and Daniel began to find rhythm. Every morning, she read him a letter from Gloria's notebook. She edited the words aloud to sound like a bedtime story. There once was a brave woman who lived in a house of steel, but her heart was made of honey. Some days, she'd catch herself staring at him while he slept, tiny fists curled by his face, lips parted, breath shallow but steady. And in those moments, she saw Gloria, not just in his dark eyes or the line of his chin, but in the quiet strength that radiated from such a small being. There was one night, just after his 6-week checkup, when Daniel spiked a fever. It came out of nowhere. One minute he was smiling up at her, the next his body was burning up and he wouldn't stop crying. Panic wrapped around her throat like barbed wire. She called the pediatrician, then urgent care, pacing the hallway barefoot with Daniel pressed against her chest. At one point, she dropped to her knees on the rug, sobbing. "I don't know what I'm doing," she whispered. "Mama, please. I need you." The fever broke at dawn. Daniel whimpered, then fell asleep in her arms as the first light of morning bled through the blinds. That was the first time Brianna said it out loud. "You're my son." It didn't matter that she hadn't given birth to him. It didn't matter that the world saw her as his guardian. In that moment, she knew, love wasn't biology. It was showing up at 3 a.m. with shaky hands and desperate prayers. After that night, everything shifted. She framed Gloria's last note, the one about naming him Daniel after survival, and hung it by the crib. Every visitor, every social worker, every nurse who came by read it. Some cried. Some simply nodded in reverence. And Brianna? She stopped second-guessing herself. She still had bad days, when the crying wouldn't stop or the house felt too quiet once Daniel drifted asleep. But each time she folded a tiny onesie or hummed a song Gloria once wrote in a journal, she felt her mother's presence, not as a ghost, but as a guide. Daniel began to smile more. He tracked her with his eyes. He gripped her fingers tighter each week. At 3 months, he laughed for the first time at the sound of a wooden spoon tapping a glass cup. It was such a strange, musical giggle that Brianna nearly dropped the spoon in awe. "You're magic," she whispered. Just like her, she started writing her own letters. Not to Daniel, but to Gloria. She tucked them into a small cedar box beside the crib. He hiccups when he sleeps. He likes jazz more than lullabies. You be proud of him. You be proud of me, too. Love was no longer a thing she feared. It was the thing that kept her breathing. At the small memorial service held just outside the prison chapel, a few inmates gathered silently, heads bowed. Marcia read from one of Gloria's letters. "They tried to bury me, but they didn't know I was a seed." A guard placed a single white lily on the altar. In the front row, Brianna cradled Daniel in her arms, whispering to him, "Your mama was braver than all of us, and we're going to make sure the world never forgets that." Marcia Tate remained seated long after the others had begun to rise. The chapel had mostly cleared, save for a few lingering guards and a maintenance worker adjusting the floral display. But she couldn't move, not yet. Her hands were trembling around the small towel in her lap, the one that had once belonged to Gloria. She ran her thumb gently across the embroidered corner, a faded GM stitched in thick, imperfect loops. Gloria had sewn it herself years ago, during one of those cold winters when the prison heating barely worked. She had passed it to Marcia one night after chapel, whispering, "For when the crying sneaks up on you." That night had saved Marcia's life. Her mind drifted back to that moment, 6 years ago now, when she tried to take her own life with a pencil-sharpening blade smuggled from the library. Gloria had found her slumped behind the laundry bins, wrists trembling, blood blooming in slow petals across her forearms. But Gloria didn't scream, didn't panic. She just sat beside her, humming a hymn that Marcia hadn't heard since she was a girl. She pressed that little towel against her wounds and whispered, "I can't fix the whole world, but I'm not letting it take you." Marcia remembered sobbing so hard that night, she thought her ribs would shatter. "You don't even know me," she had choked out. Gloria had just smiled, her eyes soft. "Baby, I know pain. That's enough." Now, sitting in the same chapel where that same woman had lit candles for the hurting and braided hair for the lonely, Marcia felt a hole deeper than any cell block could hold. She looked up at the photo framed near the altar, Gloria in her standard-issue sweatshirt, silver hair tied back, eyes serene. But Marcia didn't remember her that way. She remembered Gloria laughing, quiet and raspy, when the coffee was burned. She remembered her humming while folding sheets. She remembered her fierce, unwavering calm. Gloria never raised her voice, but her presence shouted louder than any warden's orders. And Marcia knew things the press would never report. How Gloria had taught half the girls in C Block how to read, including the ones who couldn't spell their own names. How she organized a secret memorial for a trans inmate no one had claimed. How she gave up her extra blanket every winter, saying, "I run warm." How she told Marcia once, "You don't have to be good to be worthy. You just have to stay alive long enough to remember your name." She had been more than a mentor, more than a friend. Gloria Mayfield had been the moral spine of the prison, and now she was gone. Marcia stood slowly, holding the towel like a relic, and walked to the altar. She didn't speak aloud. Her grief was too sacred for an audience, but she whispered inside herself, "You kept me breathing, G. I'll keep your story breathing." Before she left the chapel, she slipped a folded scrap of paper into the frame of Gloria's photo. It read, "You didn't save the world. You saved us, and we'll never forget." The warden's office was later remodeled into a counseling center named Gloria's Room. It now serves as a safe space for any inmate or staff member to report abuse without fear. A photo of Gloria, gray hair pulled back, eyes serene, hangs above the desk. Beside it, etched in brass, reads, "She was never invisible. We just didn't look hard enough." Warden James sat alone in his stripped-down office, now devoid of photos, awards, and a nameplate that had once gleamed on his desk. The overhead light buzzed faintly. Outside, the hallway echoed with the shuffle of new administrative personnel brought in during the investigation. He had been placed on unpaid leave pending formal review. But truth be told, he didn't need a committee to tell him he'd failed. He already knew. A stack of internal memos and interview transcripts lay scattered across the desk. At the top was a memo from the Department of Public Safety and Corrections. Incident summary. Subject: Inmate Gloria Mayfield, ID number 5572, found deceased March 15th. Pregnant. Cause: ligature strangulation. Staff suspect: Officer Darius Coleman, ID number 3279. James rubbed his temples. The name bled through every page. They'd asked him under oath, "Did you receive any complaints regarding Officer Coleman's behavior?" He had answered, "Not officially." What he hadn't said, what he hadn't been able to admit at the time, was that he had noticed something. Subtle things. Gloria's sudden withdrawal from chapel. The bruising on her wrists noted by the medical unit that never made it into a full report. Coleman's erratic behavior during night shifts. His request for coverage changes without explanation. He had chalked it up to stress, understaffing, system strain. But deep down, he'd known something was off. And now, Gloria Mayfield was dead. The internal affairs interviews had been brutal. Investigators combed through surveillance archives, time cards, electronic gate logs. They found gaps, contradictions, and a disturbing pattern. Coleman had loitered on C block for hours after shift changes. Several female inmates, though afraid, described his lingering stares, his unprovoked comments. What haunted James most, however, was the testimony of Officer Denise Morrow, a 17-year veteran. She had told investigators, "I once found Gloria crying in the library. That woman never cried. I asked her what was wrong, and she just said, 'I'm afraid he's going to take something from me I won't be able to get back.' I should have said something. So should he." In the margins of one transcript, a civilian oversight committee member had written in red ink, "Pattern of willful ignorance and administrative neglect." The phrase struck James like a slap. He wasn't a cruel man. He hadn't covered anything up. But that was the point, wasn't it? He hadn't looked. During a closed-door interview, the lead civilian investigator, Dr. Marlene Booker, had asked him one final question. "If you could speak to Ms. Mayfield today, what would you say?" He didn't answer then. But now, staring at her photo taped to the office wall, one no one had bothered to take down, he found the words. "I'm sorry I made you invisible," he whispered. "You weren't. Not really. I just didn't look hard enough." He stood, walked to the door, then paused. On the bulletin board just outside the office, someone had tacked up a photocopy of a letter found in Gloria's mattress. Her handwriting curved like waves, neat and steady. I don't expect them to listen, but I'll write it anyway, because paper holds truth better than people do. James closed his eyes. He wasn't warden anymore, and maybe he didn't deserve to be, but he knew what he had to do next. The next morning, he appeared voluntarily before the grand jury as a character witness, not for Darius, but for Gloria. He confirmed the system failed her, that he failed her, that she was never the kind of inmate who caused trouble, but always the kind who tried to help others find peace. That her final weeks showed a woman preparing for birth and bracing for death. It was the first time in 26 years that a former prison warden cried during sworn testimony. The courtroom was packed. Reporters filled every seat in the gallery. Cameras weren't allowed inside, but that didn't stop the sketch artists from feverishly working their pencils, capturing the stoic face of Darius Coleman as he sat at the defendant's table in an ill-fitting suit. It had been 9 months since Gloria Mayfield was found dead in that prison bathroom. 9 months of headlines. 9 months of outrage. 9 months of silence from Darius. Until now, the prosecution opened with force. A 63-year-old woman, a pregnant inmate, a corrections officer in a position of absolute power. This isn't just abuse of authority. This is the murder of a woman who was finally trying to reclaim her voice. Gloria Mayfield died with a child inside her because she dared to say no more. They presented the physical evidence. DNA under her nails, the bruises, the security footage, the torn cloth used to kill her, stained with Darius's sweat. They read aloud from her notebook. They showed the jury the bloodied note with his ID number, and they projected an image of baby Daniel, alive, breathing, with eyes so much like his mother's it made the entire courtroom go still. The defense tried a different route. They claimed the relationship was consensual, that Gloria had latched onto him, seeking comfort in her old age, that she'd fabricated a narrative to gain sympathy and attention. She was manipulative, the attorney argued. She knew exactly what she was doing. She made this up to secure a transfer to get out of that facility. But then came Brianna Lee. When she took the stand, the courtroom changed. She didn't wear her uniform. She wore black, a simple dress, hair pulled back, a silver locket around her neck, the same one Gloria had worn in her intake photo 20 years earlier. The prosecutor asked her to state her relationship to the victim. Brianna hesitated, then said softly, "She was my mother." A gasp rippled across the courtroom. Even the judge blinked. Brianna continued. Brianna paused, her voice catching in her throat as memories, long buried, rose like ghosts in the silence. I didn't know when I joined the department. I didn't know when I first saw her. But I remember something. The courtroom hushed even more, as if the walls themselves leaned in. I was 7, living in a foster home in Lafayette. It was a group house, 10 of us. I had this habit. I always sat at the windowsill when visitors came, hoping someone might ask for me. Her eyes glazed slightly as she drifted into the past. There was a woman who came one rainy Saturday. She wasn't there for any of us. She just sat in the lobby, holding a clipboard, staring at the check-in sheet. I watched her from the window. Her hair was tied back in a gray bun. Her hands were shaking like leaves. Brianna looked down at Daniel, then back up. I didn't know her name then, but I remember she had kind eyes. And when she stood to leave, she looked straight at me and smiled. Not a big smile, just warm, like she already knew me. She let out a shaky breath. I found out years later that the state had denied her petition. She tried to get custody, even from inside prison walls. They told her it was impossible, that she was a danger to the child and no longer the legal parent. So she came just to see me, for 5 minutes, behind glass, She pressed a palm gently against the wooden rail of the witness stand, grounding herself. Years after that, when I got that letter from G, I didn't believe it was real. I thought it was some cruel prank. But there was a detail in it no one could have known. She wrote, "You always sat at window C12, third from the left. I waited until you looked up. And you did." Brianna smiled sadly. I never forgot that. A beat of silence passed. The jury hung on every word. My whole life, I thought my mother abandoned me. But she didn't run. She stayed. She tried to come back. The system didn't let her. Her voice strengthened. And now I know she didn't stop writing. She didn't stop loving. She never stopped being my mother, even when the world tried to erase her. The courtroom was silent as Brianna reached in her bag and lifted baby Daniel, now 9 months old, onto her hip. He cooed, wide-eyed, and clutched at the edge of the witness box. The jurors watched him with something between awe and heartbreak. This is the boy she died for. The boy she pointed directly at Darius, tried to erase. But you can't erase truth. You can't erase blood. And you will not erase my mother. After closing arguments, the jury deliberated for 3 hours. When they returned, no one dared breathe. The foreman stood. On the count of first-degree murder, we find the defendant guilty. On the count of aggravated sexual assault, guilty. Abuse of authority, guilty. Tampering with evidence, guilty. Each word landed like a hammer. Darius stared ahead, jaw clenched, unmoving. He didn't flinch. He didn't speak. He just crumbled silently. At sentencing, the judge looked down at him and said, "You use your position to prey on the most vulnerable person in that prison. A woman who posed no threat to you. A woman who had already lost more than most of us can imagine. You silenced her, but you didn't silence the truth." He sentenced Darius Coleman to life in prison without the possibility of parole. And then, after a long pause, he added, "This court also recognizes the bravery of Officer Brianna Lee and the child she now protects. Let the record show, some legacies are born for pain, but they grow in love." Outside the courthouse, reporters swarmed Brianna as she stepped down the stairs with Daniel in her arms. "Do you have a statement for the public?" She nodded. My mother wasn't weak. She wasn't disposable. She was a woman who endured more than any human should. She didn't just give birth in a prison. She gave hope to a system that forgot how to care. That evening, Brianna sat by Daniel's crib, watching him sleep. She opened Gloria's notebook again, flipping to the very last page. The ink had faded, but the words still lived. "If I could be remembered for anything, let it not be how I died, but how I refused to let silence be my legacy." Brianna smiled through tears. "You're not forgotten, Mama. Not anymore." She leaned down and kissed Daniel's forehead. "You're not alone either." And for the first time in a long time, the room felt warm. Not because justice had been served, but because love, real, relentless, and unyielding love, had finally been set free.